Take Zeref those rags. The rich rancher ordered the giant mail-order bride. He bought, but what he did after shocked her. Take off those rags. The rich rancher's command hit Nora Brennan like a physical blow. His voice cold and final as he stood in the doorway of his massive Montana ranch house, staring down at the giant mail-order bride he'd just bought for $3,000 from a human trafficker who'd transported her across 4 territories in chains. Nora stood 6'3" in her bare feet, her powerful frame wrapped in literal rags, torn cotton and dried blood, and 4 weeks of filth from being moved like cargo. And she knew exactly what came next, because she'd heard the stories, knew what rich ranchers expected from the giant mail-order brides they bought from men like Vernon Cross. Knew that take off those rags was just the first command in a long list of orders that would strip away whatever dignity she had left after being sold by her own uncle to pay his gambling debts. Take off those rags, Dalton Kane repeated. This cattle baron who'd built an empire from nothing. This widower who'd paid a fortune for a woman he'd never met. This stranger who now held legal papers that said he owned her contract, her labor, her body, everything, except the thoughts she kept locked behind her teeth. She was 25 years old, and she'd spent her entire life being called unnatural, freakish, too tall, too strong, too much woman for any decent man to want. And now she'd been reduced to this, standing in front of a mansion she'd never belong in, about to undress for a man who'd purchased her the way other men purchased horses. Her hands moved to the torn fabric at her shoulders, trembling not from cold, but from the sick certainty of what happened to women who didn't obey rich ranchers who bought them. And she forced herself to meet Dalton, Kane's eyes expecting to see hunger or cruelty or the cold satisfaction of a man inspecting his property. But what she saw in those storm-grey eyes wasn't any of those things. It was fury, raw and devastating, but not directed at her. The rich rancher's jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping beneath his beard, and his hands were fisted at his sides like he was fighting not to hit something. And when he spoke again, his voice shook with an emotion she couldn't name. "Take off those rags before you freeze to death in them," he said. But before she could move, before she could force her shaking fingers to obey, Dalton Kane did something that made absolutely no sense. He pulled off his own coat, thick wool, probably worth more than everything Nora had owned in her entire life, and in 3 long strides he crossed the porch and wrapped it around her shoulders, uncovering the rags, covering her shame, covering her before she'd even moved. "I'm not asking you to undress for me," Dalton said, his voice rough, almost broken. "I'm asking you to let me burn the evidence of what that bastard did to you." His hands were careful as he pulled the coat tighter around her, and when his fingers accidentally brushed her collarbone, she flinched, couldn't help it, and she saw something crack across his face. Pain, fury, something that looked almost like grief. Behind them, the ranch house door opened and an older woman appeared, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, wearing a clean apron. "Mrs. Chen," Dalton called without looking away from Nora, "draw a hot bath, lay out the blue bedroom, and bring every dress from the cedar chest, all of them." Then he turned back to Nora, and what he said next shattered every assumption she'd built about what this moment would be. "You were never supposed to be in rags," the rich rancher said quietly, and there was something in his voice that sounded almost like shame. "Vernon Cross told me he was transporting mail-order brides. He didn't tell me he was transporting them like prisoners. He didn't tell me you'd been—" His voice broke completely. "I paid $3,000, Miss Brennan, but I didn't pay to own you. I paid to intercept you, to free you from where he was really taking you." Nora stared at him, her mind unable to process the words. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice hoarse from 4 weeks of not speaking. "You bought me. The papers say you own my contract. That means—" "It means I own the debt your uncle sold to Vernon Cross," Dalton interrupted gently. "It means I paid the $3,000 he would have gotten from the brothel in Denver. But Miss Brennan, Nora, I have no intention of keeping you." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded document. "These are papers my lawyer drew up. They state that you own 50% of this ranch, that you have access to the accounts, that you can leave any time with provisions, money, and a horse. I'm not asking you to stay because you owe me. I'm asking you to choose to stay because you want to." The words hit her like bullets. 50%, access, leave, choose. Every single one contradicted everything she'd been taught about what happened to women who got sold. "Why?" The word came out broken, desperate. "Why would you do this?" Dalton Kane looked at her for a long moment. "Because 12 years ago, someone did it for me. When I was starving and desperate and about to sell myself to a mining company that would have killed me in 6 months, a rancher named Samuel Hart paid my debts and gave me a choice. He's dead now. I never got to repay him. When I heard about Vernon Cross's operation, about women being trafficked under the guise of mail order arrangements, I thought, maybe this is how I pay it forward. But you could have bought any woman for a fraction of that price," Nora said, confusion and hope warring in her chest. "Why pay so much? Why choose me?" The rich rancher's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Vernon told me about you. Said you were the biggest problem he'd ever transported. Said you were too tall, too strong, too difficult, and no man in his right mind would want you. And I thought, that's exactly who I want to meet. A woman strong enough to be a problem, strong enough to survive, strong enough to stand beside me as an equal." Nora's knees buckled. Dalton caught her before she hit the porch boards, his arms strong and steady, and for the first time in 4 weeks, she let herself lean on another human being. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered against his shoulder. "I don't know how to be free." "Neither did I," he said quietly. "But we'll figure it out together. If you choose to stay." Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway. "Bath's ready, Mr. Kane, and I've laid out the dresses like you asked." Dalton released Nora carefully, like she was something precious that might break. "Go inside, get warm. Wash away everything Vernon Cross put you through." He gestured toward the door. "Mrs. Chen will stay with you the whole time. I'll be out here burning these." He touched the edge of her torn sleeve. "And when you come back out, you'll never have to wear rags again." Nora walked through the door on shaking legs, wrapped in a rich rancher's coat, carrying papers that said she owned half of Montana. And for the first time in 25 years, she wondered what it would feel like to be seen as something other than too much. Inside, the house smelled of cedar and coffee and something else, safety maybe, though she'd forgotten what that felt like. Mrs. Chen led her up a wide staircase to a room painted soft blue, where a copper tub steamed in front of a crackling fireplace. Laid across the bed were 5 dresses. Real dresses, not rags, made of quality fabric in deep greens and rich browns and one the color of wheat fields at sunset. "He's been planning this for weeks," Mrs. Chen said quietly, helping Nora out of Dalton's coat. "Ever since he heard about Vernon Cross's operation. Ordered these dresses special. Had the lawyer draw up those papers. Told me to prepare this room like it was for royalty, not—" She stopped, looked at Nora's face. "Not for someone he was buying. For someone he was freeing." Nora sank into the hot water and bit back a sob. The heat burned at first, then sank into her bones, washing away 4 weeks of filth and terror and the sticky residue of being treated like cargo. Through the window, she could see Dalton in the yard, building a fire. He threw her rags onto the flames 1 piece at a time, his face grim, and she watched the fabric blacken and curl and turn to ash. "Burning the evidence," he'd said, "burning the past." When she finally emerged from the bath, clean and warm, for the first time in forever, she chose the wheat-colored dress. It fit perfectly, tailored for a tall woman. For someone who took up space unapologetically, Mrs. Chen brushed out her hair, long, dark, tangled from weeks of neglect, and braided it simply. "You look like yourself again," the older woman said. Nora stared at her reflection. "I don't think I've ever looked like myself before." Downstairs, Dalton waited by the fire, the last of her rags turning to embers. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression made her chest tight. Not hunger, not possession, just quiet appreciation, like she was a painting worth studying. "The dress suits you," he said. "It's beautiful. So are you." The words hung in the air between them. Nora had been called many things, giant, unnatural, too much problem, but never beautiful. She didn't know what to do with it. I made dinner, Dalton continued, gesturing toward the table. Nothing fancy, just stew and bread. But you should eat. They sat across from each other, strangers learning how to share space. The stew was good, thick with meat and vegetables, and Nora ate slowly, savoring every bite. Dalton watched her with those storm-grey eyes, not hovering, not demanding, just present. Tomorrow, he said finally, I'll show you the ranch, introduce you to the hands. They'll need to know you're not... He paused, choosing words carefully. That you're the owner, not a servant, not property equal. They'll talk, Nora said quietly. The whole territory will talk. Let them. His voice was steel, wrapped in velvet. Anyone who has a problem with how I run my ranch can leave. After dinner, Dalton showed her to her room, the blue one with the dresses and the fireplace and a door that locked from the inside. You're safe here, he said from the doorway. No one will hurt you. No one will take you. And tomorrow, if you want to leave, I'll give you everything I promised. And if I want to stay... He smiled, real and warm. Then we'll figure out what that looks like. Together. Nora locked the door behind him, not out of fear, but out of habit, out of the need to prove to herself that she could. She lay in the soft bed, wrapped in clean sheets, and cried for the first time in years. Not from sadness, from relief. From the strange, terrifying, beautiful possibility that maybe, impossibly, she'd been freed instead of bought. Outside, the Montana night settled over the ranch, cold and clear. And somewhere in the darkness, Vernon Cross was realizing he'd made a terrible mistake. He paused, choosing words carefully. That you're the owner, not a servant, not property, equal. They'll talk, Nora said quietly. The whole territory will talk. Let them. His voice was steel wrapped in velvet. Anyone who has a problem with how I run my ranch can leave. After dinner, Dalton showed her to her room, the blue one, with the dresses and the fireplace, and a door that locked from the inside. You're safe here, he said from the doorway. No one will hurt you. No one will take you. And tomorrow, if you want to leave, I'll give you everything I promised. And if I want to stay... He smiled, real and warm. Then we'll figure out what that looks like. Together. Nora locked the door behind him, not out of fear but out of habit, out of the need to prove to herself that she could. She lay in the soft bed, wrapped in clean sheets, and cried for the first time in years. Not from sadness, from relief. From the strange, terrifying, beautiful possibility that maybe, impossibly, she'd been freed instead of bought. Outside, the Montana night settled over the ranch, cold and clear. And somewhere in the darkness, Vernon Cross was realizing he'd made a terrible mistake. Morning came with the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Nora woke disoriented, tangled in sheets softer than anything she'd ever known, sunlight streaming through windows that didn't have bars. For 3 heartbeats, she forgot where she was. Then memory crashed back. The ranch, the papers, Dalton Kane saying you're free. She dressed in the green dress, braided her hair, and descended the stairs on quiet feet. In the kitchen, Dalton stood at the stove, sleeves rolled to his elbows, flipping bacon with practiced ease. He looked up when she entered, and something warm flickered across his face. You cook, she said, surprised. Been doing it for years. Mrs. Chen doesn't live here full-time. He gestured to the table. Sit, eat, then I'll show you your ranch, your ranch. The words settled strange in her chest. They ate in comfortable silence, and afterward Dalton led her outside, where the Montana morning spread wide and golden. 3 ranch hands worked near the corral, 2 men and 1 woman, all of them stopping to stare when they saw Nora's height, her powerful frame. Listen up, Dalton called, his voice carrying authority. This is Nora Brennan. She owns 50% of this operation. What she says carries the same weight as my word. Anyone who has a problem with that can collect their pay and leave. Silence. Then the woman stepped forward, work-worn hand extended. Clara Moss. Welcome, Miss Brennan. Nora shook her hand, and something tight in her chest loosened. The men followed, James and Robert, both nodding with cautious respect. No leering, No cruel jokes about her size. Just acknowledgement. Dalton spent the morning showing her everything, the cattle, the water rights, the supply routes, the books. He explained finances with patience, answered her questions without condescension, treated her like a partner learning the business. Not property learning her place? Around noon, a rider appeared on the horizon. Nora's stomach dropped when she recognized the expensive suit, the cruel smile. Vernon Cross, flanked by 2 hired guns, rode straight up to the ranch house like he owned it. "Kane!" Vernon called out, dismounting with theatrical flair. "We need to talk about the damaged goods you purchased. I'm willing to offer you a partial refund. Get off my land," Dalton said, voice deadly quiet. Vernon's smile widened. "I don't think you understand. That woman is defective. Too big, too difficult. I'm doing you a favor." Nora stepped forward before she could think better of it, and her voice came out stronger than she expected. "I'm not goods. I'm not damaged. And I'm not going anywhere with you." Vernon's eyes narrowed. "You don't have a choice, girl." "The contract was paid in full," Dalton interrupted, pulling the receipt from his vest. $3,000. "Transaction complete. Now get the hell off our property before I bury you on it." The 2 hired guns shifted nervously. Vernon's face reddened. "You think this is over? I'll be back with the sheriff and proper papers." "That woman owes nothing," Nora said firmly. "I owe you nothing." And for the first time in her life, she believed it. Vernon didn't come back alone. 3 days later, he returned with the sheriff, wearing a tarnished badge and carrying forged documents claiming Nora still owed $2,000 in transport fees and damages. The sheriff, a thin man named Pickett with eyes like a weasel, stood on the porch, reading from the falsified papers while Vernon smirked behind him. "Says here, Miss Brennan, damaged property during transport, attempted escape twice, and caused injury to Mr. Cross's associate," Sheriff Pickett drawled. "That makes her liable for additional compensation. Mr. Cross is within his rights to reclaim her until the debt is satisfied." Nora felt the old fear crawling up her spine. The familiar paralysis of being powerless against men with papers and badges, and the law twisted to serve them. But then Dalton's hand settled warm and steady on her shoulder. "Those documents are forgeries," Dalton said calmly. "And Sheriff, if you'd done your job, you'd know Vernon Cross is wanted in 3 territories for human trafficking. I have the real papers right here." He pulled out a telegram, unfolded it slowly. "From U.S. Marshal David Hendricks. Seems he's been tracking Cross for 2 years. I sent him word the moment Cross showed up here." Vernon's smirk vanished. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Dalton's voice was steel wrapped in ice. "Because Marshal Hendricks should be arriving in Redemption Falls right about now. In fact," he nodded toward the ridge where a line of riders appeared, led by a man wearing a silver star that caught the sunlight. "There he is." Vernon ran. Actually ran, sprinting toward his horse, but the marshal's men were faster. They had him in irons within seconds, Vernon screaming about his rights, while the marshal read charges that made Nora's stomach turn. Trafficking, fraud, kidnapping, assault. 17 women over 3 years. 17 lives destroyed for profit. Sheriff Pickett tried to slip away quietly, but Marshal Hendricks called out, "Pickett, you're done too. Accepting bribes, falsifying documents. You'll stand trial." As they dragged both men away, Vernon turned back one last time, his face twisted with rage. "You think you're free, girl? You think anyone will ever see you as anything but a freak? You're too damn big, too damn ugly, and Kane will realize it soon enough." Dalton moved so fast Nora barely saw it. One moment he was beside her. The next, his fist connected with Vernon's jaw with a crack that echoed across the yard. Vernon dropped like a stone. "Call her that again," Dalton said quietly, dangerously, "and I'll make sure you never speak again." Marshal Hendricks hauled Vernon to his feet, blood streaming from his mouth. "Get him out of here," the marshal ordered his men, then turned to Nora. "Miss Brennan, I'll need your testimony. You willing to testify against Cross?" Nora's throat was tight, but her voice came out clear. "Yes, I'll testify." "Good. There are 16 other women who deserve justice. Your testimony might be what finally puts him away for life." As the marshal's men rode off with their prisoners, Nora turned to Dalton. His knuckles were bleeding, his jaw tight with residual anger. "You hit him. she said softly. I should have killed him. Why didn't you? He looked at her then, really looked, and what she saw in his eyes made her breath catch. Because you're worth more than his blood on my hands. You're worth everything, Nora, and I need you to start believing that. Something cracked open in her chest, something that had been locked down for 25 years, the possibility that she could be wanted, not despite her size and strength, but because of it. That she could be seen as magnificent instead of monstrous. I don't know how, she whispered. Then, let me show you. He took her bleeding hands. She'd been clenching her fists so tight her nails had cut into her palms, and held them gently. Stay, Nora, not because you owe me, not because you're afraid. Stay because you want to build something here. With me. She looked at him, this rich rancher who'd bought her freedom instead of her body, who'd given her power instead of taking it, who'd just punched a man for calling her ugly, and she made a choice that was entirely, completely, terrifyingly hers. I'll stay. Winter came slow to Redemption Falls, the first snow dusting the mountains like powdered sugar, while the valley held green a little longer. Nora stood in the north pasture, sleeves rolled up despite the cold, hammering fence posts alongside James and Robert. Her muscles burned with the good kind of tired, the kind that came from work you chose instead of work forced upon you. Miss Brennan, James called, wiping sweat from his forehead. You're making us look bad, she laughed, a sound that still surprised her when it came out. Then work faster. Clara rode up on her bay mare, grinning. Boss wants you at the house. Says it's important. Nora's stomach flipped. 3 months had passed since Vernon's arrest. 3 months of learning the ranch, learning herself, learning what it meant to live without fear. 3 months of Dalton treating her like a partner, an equal, never once demanding more than she offered. But lately something had shifted between them, glances that lingered, hands that touched longer than necessary, conversations that stretched late into the night by the fire. She found him on the porch, holding something wrapped in cloth. When he saw her, his expression softened in that way that made her chest tight. Come with me, he said simply. They walked to the ridge overlooking the valley, where the ranch spread below them like a promise. The sun was setting, painting everything gold and amber. Dalton unwrapped the cloth, revealing a hand-carved wooden box. When Samuel Hart gave me my freedom 12 years ago, he began, voice rough with emotion, he told me something I've never forgotten. He said, freedom isn't just about not being owned. It's about having the power to choose your own life, your own path, your own love. He opened the box. Inside lay a simple silver ring. No jewels, no ornamentation, just honest metal worked by honest hands. I made this. Took me 2 months, because I kept getting it wrong, kept trying to make it perfect when you've taught me that perfect doesn't matter. What matters is choice. Nora's breath caught. I'm not asking you to marry me because you owe me, or because the ranch needs it, or because society expects it, Dalton continued. His storm-grey eyes locked on hers. I'm asking because over these 3 months I've watched you bloom from someone who flinched at shadows into someone who laughs while hammering fence posts. I've watched you testify against Vernon with your head high, helping put him away for 20 years. I've watched you become the strongest, bravest, most magnificent woman I've ever known. He took her hand. And I've fallen completely, hopelessly in love with you, not despite your height or your strength, but because of it. Because you're everything I've been searching for, a partner who can stand beside me, not behind me. Tears burned down Nora's cheeks. I don't know how to be someone's wife. I don't know how to. Then we'll figure it out together, he said, echoing his words from that first night. But Nora, you need to understand something. If you say no, nothing changes. The ranch is still half yours. Your room is still yours. I'll still treat you with the same respect, the same partnership. This ring doesn't come with conditions. It's just, his voice cracked, it's just me hoping you might choose me the way I've already chosen you. Nora looked at this man who'd paid $3,000 not to own her, but to free her. Who'd burned her rags and given her dresses. Who'd handed her legal papers and power before asking for anything in return. Who'd punched Vernon Cross for calling her ugly and testified beside her in court. who'd spent 2 months carving a ring because he wanted it to be right. And she realized that for the first time in her life, she knew exactly what she wanted. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you. Not because I owe you, not because I'm grateful, but because you taught me what love actually means. It's not possession, it's not transaction. It's choosing each other freely every single day." He slipped the ring on her finger, and it fit perfectly. Then Dalton Kane, cattle baron and the gentlest man she'd ever known, pulled her close and kissed her like she was precious, like she was chosen, like she was exactly enough. They married in the spring, in the valley with the whole ranch watching. Nora wore the wheat-colored dress and stood tall, no longer trying to make herself smaller, no longer apologizing for taking up space. When the preacher asked if she took this man, her voice rang out clear and strong, "I do. I choose him." And when Dalton said his vows, he added something that wasn't traditional. "I promise to never own you, only to love you, to never diminish you, only to celebrate you, to stand beside you as your equal, your partner, your choice." That night, as they stood on their porch watching the stars emerge, Nora thought about the girl in rags who'd stood on this same porch 6 months ago, terrified and certain her life was over. She thought about Vernon rotting in prison, about her uncle Tobias, who'd sold her and hadn't been heard from since, about all the women throughout history who'd been treated as property and never got to choose. "What are you thinking?" Dalton asked, his arm warm around her waist. "That I spent 25 years being told I was too much," she said quietly. "Too tall, too strong, too difficult. And you looked at all of that and said, 'That's exactly what I want.'" He turned her to face him. "You were never too much, Nora. The world was just too small. Too afraid of women who couldn't be controlled or diminished or made to apologize for their existence." He touched her face gently. "You're magnificent. And I'm honored you chose me." She kissed him then, this man who'd given her everything by giving her choice, and somewhere deep in her bones she felt the last chains fall away. Not the iron ones Vernon had used, but the invisible ones she'd carried her whole life. The belief that she was wrong, broken, unlovable. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder. "For what?" "For seeing me. Not the giant, not the problem. Just me. Always," he promised. "Always just you." Years later, when people asked about the giant bride and the rich rancher of Redemption Falls, they'd tell the story differently depending on who was listening. Some said he'd saved her. Others said she'd civilized him. But those who knew them best, Clara and James and Robert, Mrs. Chen and Marshall Hendricks, they knew the truth. Neither had saved the other. They'd simply given each other the rarest gift of all, the freedom to choose, and the courage to be chosen in return. And in a world that tried to make women small and men cruel, Nora Brennan and Dalton Kane built something different, a partnership of equals. A love without ownership, a home where strength was celebrated and choice was sacred, where rags were burned and dignity restored, where a woman could stand 6'3" and be called magnificent instead of monstrous, where freedom wasn't given but earned, where love wasn't possession but partnership, where two broken people became whole not by fixing each other, but by choosing each other every single day. If Nora and Dalton's story moved your heart, hit that like button. Subscribe to WestTale for more tales where freedom is fought for, love is chosen, and strength is celebrated. Turn on the notification bell. Drop a comment telling us what moment hit you hardest. Because out here in the frontier, the greatest act of love isn't rescuing someone. It's giving them the power to rescue themselves.